We find ourselves in the Netherlands, in a quiet town called Arnhem, about an hour away from Amsterdam, where Winsie lives with her family. Winsie's full name is Joyce Howe, but everyone calls her Winsie, so I will too. Winsie was born in Hong Kong on May 15, 1996, and moved with her family to the Netherlands when she was still a child. Growing up, she learned Dutch perfectly without any accent. She became a beautiful and intelligent teenager, excelling in her studies. In addition to being an excellent student, she plays the piano, dances, and is also a talent in chess. Being a member of a prestigious club called Dam Club, she participated in the National Chess Championship, reaching the semifinals twice. Winsie attends high school and is very popular, surrounded by many friends. Her circle of friends narrowed over time, and now she spends more time with friends of Chinese descent like her. Winsie's life was normal until January 14, 2012, a Saturday afternoon around 3 p.m. At that moment, someone rang the doorbell. Winsie's father, Chun Nam Hao, opened the door and found a teenage boy standing there, who seemed to be around his daughter's age, although he didn't know him. Chun Nam Hao asked who he was and what he was looking for, especially because Winsie had a younger brother. The boy replied that he wanted to talk to Winsie. Chun Nam Hao called her and she appeared at the top of the stairs leading to the second floor of the house. The father went back to the kitchen, leaving the two kids alone. Shortly after, Winsie started screaming in a terrifying manner. Her father quickly ran to the entrance, only to be attacked and slashed in the face with a knife by the same teenager who had knocked on the door a little earlier. Chun Nam Hao tried to defend himself, but the teenager managed to hit him repeatedly in the face and arms before fleeing. The commotion caught the attention of Winsie's 12-year-old brother, who ran to see what was happening. When he arrived, he found his sister and father covered in blood, injured in various parts of their bodies. The boy immediately called an ambulance, and Winsie and her father were rushed to the hospital. The police arrived with the ambulance and chased the teenage assailant because the neighborhood had seen everything and noticed the boy fleeing, covered in blood. So it's safe to say he didn't slip under the radar. The boy made a run for it, seeking refuge in some bushes, adamantly refusing to surrender, even though the police had practically encircled him. But after one of the officers fired a warning shot into the air, the boy had a change of heart, allowing them to finally apprehend him. His name? Jin Hua, a mere 14-year-old. Due to his status as a minor, his last name was never disclosed. He will be referred to as Jin Hua K. For the sake of simplicity in this video, let's just call him Jin. But what's truly bewildering is that Jin apparently didn't even know Winsie. So what compelled him that day to go to her home and attack her and her father in such a horrifying manner? I'll delve into that shortly, detailing the events surrounding Winsie and her father. In the interim, both father and daughter are hospitalized. Thankfully, Chun Nam's injuries, Winsie's father, aren't fatal. After a few stitches and several days of recuperation in the hospital, he is discharged without significant issues. Winsie's condition, on the other hand, is heartbreaking. She lies in the intensive care unit, unresponsive since the assault. The medical team spares no effort to save her, but tragically, 5 days later, on January 19, 2012, Winsie loses her battle. She succumbs to her injuries. The police interrogated Jin for hours, over 2 consecutive days. However, they couldn't extract any information from him. Being a minor, he was questioned in the presence of his lawyer and parents. Nevertheless, there were several witnesses who had seen him fleeing from Winsie's house after the attack, covered in blood, so he couldn't deny being the aggressor. Furthermore, Winsie's brother had seen him in the house just before his escape. There were no doubts about Jin being the culprit. But there were 2 possibilities. If Winsie and her father had survived, Jin would have faced minor consequences due to his age. However, now that Winsie was dead, the situation became much more serious for him, unless he managed to shift part of the blame onto someone else. And that's precisely when Jin decided to talk. The first thing he said was that it wasn't entirely his fault. Yes, he had indeed attacked Winsie and her father, but it wasn't his idea. It was a certain Wesley who had pushed him to do it. Who is this Wesley? He, too, is a teenage boy who hung out with the same group of friends as Winsie. But when the detectives brought him to the station for questioning, it was like hitting a wall. Wesley responded vaguely to the detectives' questions and denied any accusations. He denied telling Jin to kill. He denied even knowing Jin. He claimed he knew nothing and that he was being dragged into this story without any reason. but the situation was growing increasingly serious. Winsie's family was devastated by her death. People demanded answers. Every day, hundreds of individuals gathered outside Winsie's house to express their solidarity or leave a bouquet of flowers. On January 25th, practically the entire city took to the streets with candles for a moment of silence, a kind of procession in honor of the young girl. At this point, friends, the entire nation was talking about Winsie's death. As mentioned before, people demanded answers, and it didn't take long before detectives uncovered something from their investigations. Indeed, during their inquiries, detectives examined all of Jin's electronic devices. There, they found several intriguing pieces of evidence, conversations, messages that, when put together like a puzzle, told a story. To understand it, as usual, we need to take a step back and immerse ourselves in the lives of these teenagers. So brace yourselves. Winsie was a high school student, and as I mentioned earlier, she often hung out with the Chinese community boys in her town and school, including her best friend, Polly. The two had been close friends for years, but then something changed. Their friendship hit a breaking point at a party 2 months before Winsie's attack. During the event at a local venue, Winsie noticed some inappropriate behavior from Polly. The exact details were unclear, given that most news and articles about the incident were in Dutch, making it challenging to piece together the entire story. Apparently, the disagreement involved a boy. Winsie had taken an interest in him, but at the party, she observed Polly making advances toward him. This infuriated Winsie, prompting her to vent her feelings to other girls in their group. Polly caught wind of Winsie talking behind her back, and a heated argument erupted between them right at the party. Shouting escalated into insults and eventually led to a physical altercation. Their friends intervened, trying to separate them, but the evening was ruined. The fight didn't end there. The two friends drifted apart, and their relationship grew cold. A few days later, tensions boiled over on social media. Polly posted something on Facebook, the nature of which remains unclear. Winsie responded with a hurtful comment, publicly accusing Polly. Winsie's comment drew the attention of their friends, some of whom chimed in, warning her to be cautious of her words. These remarks, although written by teenagers in the heat of the moment, sounded threatening. Still, nobody took them seriously. Winsie and Polly's friendship seemed irreparably damaged. They stopped speaking to each other, but their parents, accustomed to their occasional disputes, didn't think much of it, believing they would reconcile soon enough. However, a month passed, and my earlier suspicion was confirmed. Winsie found herself excluded from a friend's birthday party in December, a clear indication of the division within their social circle. Despite not receiving an invitation, Winsie showed up at the party, igniting an uncomfortable atmosphere. Polly, upon seeing Winsie, confronted her immediately, demanding she leave the gathering. Their unresolved issues resurfaced, leading to a fierce exchange of words and, once again, turning into a physical altercation. Winsie found herself in tears, realizing she had no allies. Polly had effectively turned their friends against her. The situation became unbearable, forcing Winsie to leave the party, heartbroken and isolated. After the incident, Polly began ignoring Winsie in public, but it soon became clear that her actions went far beyond mere indifference. Polly seemed obsessed with Winsie, incessantly sending her private messages on Facebook. These messages were not just filled with anger but also contained death threats. Polly repeatedly told Winsie that she could kill her and that no one would be safe, not even her family. Winsie started taking these threats very seriously and confided in the few friends she had left, expressing her deep concern for her safety. However, her friends downplayed the situation, believing that Polly was just a dramatic teenager, prone to exaggeration when angry. They didn't think Polly would ever harm Winsie, despite her violent words. Winsie, however, was terrified. Polly seemed obsessed, and she had every reason to be. Polly constantly vented to her new boyfriend Wesley, expressing her hatred for Winsie and her desire to see her dead. The situation grew increasingly ominous as Polly and Wesley began plotting revenge. Polly wanted to inflict physical pain on Winsie as well as frighten her with messages on Facebook. Polly had Wesley by her side, a boy who, according to all their friends, had always been infatuated with Polly and had tried in every way to win her over. Polly managed to convince Wesley to completely change his appearance to prove his love and loyalty. Wesley followed her advice, changing his hair color to a bold shade of orange and getting an ear piercing. Polly seemed to have manipulated Wesley, leading him to believe that this was the only way to show his affection. Polly, with Wesley's support, escalated her hostility towards Winsie, encouraging Wesley to consider the idea of eliminating her. Wesley, boasting about his connections to the Chinese mafia, claimed he could arrange everything. However, his actions told a different story. On December 9, 2011, Wesley contacted Jin, a 14-year-old of Chinese descent, and an apparently vulnerable figure. According to those who knew him, Jin was a very insecure boy who did everything to seek approval. Polly and Wesley, seeing in Jin a means to execute their plan, involved him. This marked the beginning of a series of tragic events that would forever change Winsie's life. At the beginning, Wesley had offered Jin 1,000 euros for the mission, a significantly low amount to ask someone to take another person's life, especially considering both of them were only 16, or rather one 16-year-old and the other 14. 1,000 euros was a huge sum. At 14, Jin couldn't even dream of having that much money. Nonetheless, he agreed immediately. However, Wesley had a problem: the money. He couldn't pay it all at once, so he proposed a deal. Pay Jin in installments, €20 per month for the next 50 years, essentially for the rest of his life. An incredible offer. Despite this, they later realized this plan wasn't brilliant. They decided to give Jin 150 euros up front and offer him a round of cocktails. One night at the club they frequented, another incredible offer. All of this to take the life of an innocent girl? Jin still accepted, and initially it seemed he didn't know Winsie. This was what he had said, as if he had been hired by Wesley just to do the job, as if Jin were a professional killer. But when the truth came out, it emerged he knew Winsie. A photo depicted him between two girls, one of whom was Winsie. So Winsie and Jin weren't close friends, but they knew each other. In reality, Wesley had no connections to the Chinese mafia. Jin was just a guy from Wesley's friend group, someone easily manipulated. Polly had planned everything down to the smallest details Wesley then relayed to Jin. They provided Jin with Winsie's home address, an accurate description of her house, and the times when she was most likely to be home alone. He just had to decide when to act. Jin was just waiting for the signal from Wesley. During the Christmas holidays, however, Polly and Wesley changed their minds. It's unclear which of the two first had doubts, but they decided to cancel the plan. Wesley told Jin the plan was off and he didn't have to kill anyone anymore. However, shortly after, they changed their minds again. Meanwhile, Polly kept tormenting Winsie with terrible messages on Facebook, Twitter, and over the phone. He kept harassing her relentlessly. Meanwhile, Jin was preparing for the murder. He visited Winsie's neighborhood several times to make sure he knew the area well. On January 12th, Wesley sent Jin a message. It was the right time to act. Winsie would be home alone. Without hesitation, Jin went to Winsie's house and rang the doorbell. No response. He waited for a while, hoping Winsie would return home. His determination was clear. Otherwise, he could have given up after a short while. But no, he waited for hours. In the end, no one came, and Jin left. He communicated his failure to Wesley. When he told Wesley, Wesley and Polly were furious. They ordered him to go back there in 2 days and not leave until he had killed Winsie. Wesley threatened Jin, telling him that if Winsie wasn't dead by Saturday, he would call his contacts in the Chinese mafia to have Jin killed. Obviously, Wesley had no real connection to the Chinese mafia. Despite this, Jin, instead of going to the police, accepted the threat without hesitation. Believing in Wesley's threats, Jin promised to return 2 days later to carry out the mission. On the following day, a Friday the 13th, Jin spent the night at a friend's house. Using Skype, he contacted Wesley, their conversation held entirely in Cantonese. Wesley provided specific instructions. You have her address, you know where to go. She'll be practicing the piano at 2 p.m. You need to be there by 3. Of course, he was referring to Winsie, but there was a complication. Wesley wasn't certain if Winsie would be alone at home the next day. Jin inquired, "What should I do if her family is also home? Should I take care of them too?" Without hesitation, Wesley replied, "Yes, why not?" The next day, Jin left his friend's house and embarked on his grim mission. Meanwhile, his friend, callous and insensitive like all the teenagers entangled in this dark plot, did nothing to intervene. Instead, he posted a cryptic message on Facebook. "Today, a girl will die at 3 p.m. Only one girl responded, typing, "Oh my God," but none of their friends took the post seriously. Jin took public transport to reach Winsie's house. Arriving precisely at 3 o'clock, he rang the doorbell. Winsie's father, unsuspecting, answered the door. He asked Jin whom he was looking for, called his daughter, and left the two teenagers alone in the hallway. According to Jin, Winsie appeared confused as he uttered, "I'm sorry, but I have to do this." With chilling determination, he brandished a knife and attacked Winsie, leaving her with no time to defend herself. Winsie's father rushed to her aid, engaging in a desperate struggle with Jin. Despite his best efforts, he too was injured, fortunately not fatally. When Winsie's 12-year-old brother arrived, Jin fled the scene, leaving a trail of horror behind. The news of this heinous crime quickly spread, but strangely, none of Jin's acquaintances reported his ominous Facebook post to the authorities. However, the post caught the attention of an astute user after the incident was reported on the news. "I just saw this on the news," they commented, urging caution. The police had their eyes on social media. With Jin and Wesley both in custody, Jin promptly shifted the blame onto Wesley once the situation escalated. Meanwhile, Wesley attempted to shield his girlfriend Polly from the unfolding nightmare. However, detectives meticulously pieced together the digital evidence, connecting the dots and unraveling the truth. Suspicion had already fallen on Polly, and the evidence was mounting. A turning point came during Winsie's poignant vigil, where the entire Chinese community bid her farewell, with lanterns illuminating the night sky. A recording surfaced, capturing Polly's chilling smile as she bid her victim goodbye. The authorities obtained this footage, and on January 24th, they arrived at Polly's doorstep, putting an end to her sinister charade. Now, all three perpetrators, Polly, Jean, and Wesley, found themselves behind bars, their dark secrets exposed for the world to see. When Winsie's father learned about Polly's arrest, he was overcome with shock and sorrow. He hurried to the police, pleading, "No, there must be a mistake. Polly is my daughter's friend." The investigators found themselves in the difficult position of having to explain every detail to the man, who remained astonished and unable to fully comprehend the unfolding tragedy. Despite being aware of the frequent quarrels between Polly and Winsie in recent times, he could never have imagined that such animosity could escalate into such a heinous crime. Naturally, Polly's version sought to shift all the blame onto Wesley. Initially, when he attempted to shield his girlfriend Polly, as soon as Polly was accused, Wesley promptly pointed the finger at her, claiming that she had orchestrated the entire plot. Wesley insisted he was completely uninvolved in the situation, even going so far as to assert that Polly had planned the entire scheme, even hiring Jin to carry out the task. Whatever the truth, in the end, all three teenagers confessed to their complicity in Winsie's gruesome murder. In the Netherlands, it's crucial to note that minors receive relatively lenient sentences and are rarely tried as adults. Dutch justice primarily focuses on rehabilitation, aiming to offer young offenders a chance at redemption rather than severe punishment. This approach, known as TBS, Terbeschikking-stelling, aims to make them eligible for psychiatric care, providing them with a path to rehabilitation rather than incarceration. In the case of Polly, Wesley, and Jin was sentenced to a year in a juvenile detention center and 3 years in TBS, meaning 3 years in a psychiatric facility. Polly underwent a series of psychiatric evaluations due to suspicions of personality disorders, explaining her incredible lack of empathy even during the trial, which, however, took place behind closed doors. The girl remained consistently cold and distant, never showing any signs of remorse. She vehemently continued to deny wishing for Winsie's death, even attempting to use an absurd excuse. She claimed that in Chinese culture, it was normal to threaten someone's life every other sentence. This statement was obviously false, and furthermore, in Chinese culture, the topic of death is treated with great respect and not approached as casually as Polly tried to imply. Wesley, too, underwent a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation. Experts determined that his intellectual development was comparable to that of an 11-year-old child. They also discovered a strong emotional dependency on his mother, which Wesley transferred to Polly after the beginning of their relationship. This dependency led him to blindly obey Polly's orders. In the end, psychiatrists concluded that both Polly and Wesley suffered from emotional delays, meaning a limited or total inability to experience empathetic emotions. Due to this diagnosis, they were sentenced to only 2 years in a juvenile detention center, followed by 3 years in TBS, meaning 3 years in a psychiatric facility. Winsie's parents were devastated and furious about those sentences, both her father and mother. Winsie's mother, unfortunately, still carried a sense of guilt. She wasn't at home that day, so she felt as if she couldn't protect her daughter. Throughout the trial, Winsie's mother, whose name unfortunately eludes me, attended court wearing a t-shirt with Winsie's smiling face on it. Winsie's family didn't accept those sentences. In their eyes, those young criminals should have been treated as adults due to the brutality, cruelty, and meticulous planning of their crime. They attempted to appeal twice, but both appeals were denied. Furthermore, during the investigations and the trial, an astonishing fact emerged. Practically everyone in their social circle knew about the diabolical plan Polly and Wesley were hatching with Jin. Everyone knew, yet no one spoke up. Even Polly's mother was aware of the constant insults and threats her daughter hurled at Winsie on social media, but she did nothing. Not even the person who wrote on Facebook, "Today a girl will die at 3, bothered to call the police. None of these people were held accountable. In February 2017, Wesley was released after serving his time in juvenile detention. According to his doctors, his emotional dependencies and mental issues had been successfully addressed. 2 weeks later, Polly was also released, deemed completely healed by her physicians. Both young adults, however, were subjected to 2 conditions: to continue therapy and to avoid all contact with each other and Jin. They were strictly prohibited from communicating with Jin, who hadn't been released yet. Apparently, the psychiatric facility where he was held didn't consider him ready for release. Despite significant progress, he wasn't deemed ready. 7 months later, Jin applied for discharge, and this time his request was granted. Jin was no longer considered a threat to himself or society, so he was released in September 2017. However, he remained under a form of probation. He was constantly monitored for drug and alcohol use, and authorities had access to his financial records and social media accounts. Despite this scrutiny, it proved insufficient. In April of the following year, 2018, a man whose name remains unknown posted some computer components worth €4,000 for sale online. He agreed to meet a buyer at his home to complete the transaction. However, on the appointed day, 2 Asian men arrived at his door. Instead of paying and leaving, they pulled out a gun, aiming it at the man's head. One of them was Jin and his accomplice. Both were apprehended by the police. This incident reopened Winsie's family's wounds. They had never accepted the overly lenient sentences given to the culprits. Moreover, Jin's swift return to criminal activities upon release only reinforced their conviction. In an interview, Winsie's father expressed some satisfaction that at least Jin had returned to prison, although I couldn't find additional information about the duration of his current incarceration. These are the updates I have on this case. Let me know if you were aware of this story and what your thoughts are by leaving a comment below. As always, I appreciate you spending your time with me today. We'll see each other in the next video. Goodbye.